Hello, and welcome back to this damnful idealistic crusade. In this video, I'd like to go over the latest updates to my Laserdisc collection. These are both a wonderful mystery box from Jason Koestner, who sent me another box of fun Laserdisc goodies, and some nice titles I picked up in local stores for dirt cheap. So I'll start with the local finds. I have this nice little stack here, and amazingly, for all of the discs you see here, I spent less than $2 in combination with some store sales. Now, most of these were just curiosity buys because they were literally so cheap I couldn't say no, and then others I wanted to get and check their transfers, and some I wanted to check their audio tracks. So the first is the collection from Image, Chaplin at SNA Volume 1, or the Lost and Found collection. Now, Chaplin shorts have been restored a number of times and released in a variety of different masters and editions across formats over the years, but it's rare to stumble across one of these volumes in literally perfect condition, still with the high gloss finish on the jacket, especially for less than $1. So I immediately snapped this up, as it does give you 4 of Chaplin's shorts from 1915 in a nice overall package. This is, of course, still a jacket made by Image, so it's sized for VHS dimensions and is plain on the sides, but there is some creativity to the actual layout, and you get some nice liner notes. And as you can see, as it catches in the light, there is a really thick gloss on this jacket, so it makes a nice display piece. Especially the art on the front looks quite nice, and this does actually have PCM audio for the musical accompaniment, so this should be a nice way to look at these shorts, just out of curiosity about the transfers. And again, the jacket was so nice and the cost was so low that of course I bought this, because cheap, nice Laserdiscs have my name on them. Next, for Sam Peckinpah Films, I found the Warner release of The Ballad of Cable Hogue, still in rather nice shape, and the jacket is still in the shrink wrap. This is part of that same seemingly never-ending lot that one of my local stores got of what seems to be titles from a rental store that didn't actually rent out their discs all that much, because the jackets are still in great shape. So this is the standard Warner design of the time. You've got the silver bar on the side. It is unfortunately 2 discs without a gatefold, so these jackets are usually beat to crap by now, but this has survived quite nicely. It doesn't have major seam splitting or crumpled corners. The rear is the usual Warner design with the black background and the silver bar on the side, and a generic basic write-up, and as usual, most frustratingly, there's no technical information. But this is unfortunately not the original aspect ratio, so it's not really the way you want to be seeing the film, but it was the best video presentation of the film back in the day when you just had this, VHS, and rare television screenings. Unfortunately, this only has analog mono, but I figured I would check it anyway just to compare to the DVD and Blu-ray. And then for Billy Wilder, I found a really solid condition copy of the Laserdisc of Sunset Boulevard. This is the one and only US pressing of the film on LD, and as you can see, it's an early Paramount affair, so the actual transfer is going to be very much as is. But given the way that Paramount likes to handle their catalog and over-manipulate every film and make compromised masters in picture and sound, sometimes these old masters can actually be of importance. This is, of course, analog audio only, and I already have heard and know that this transfer is not the greatest, and neither is the audio, but I always wanted to just see it for myself, as unfortunately this film is pretty much cursed to have various technical quirks and problems every time Paramount tries one of their patented so-called restoration efforts, and the UHD also has this affect the picture and sound. So I just wanted to take a look at this at some point, and thankfully, as I was thinking about the film again and working on reviewing the UHD, the original Laserdisc popped up for super cheap, so now I can actually look at the transfer. Again, this is very much as is, and has all of the hallmarks of the Paramount design for the jacket. This one actually looks better than most because of the color background and the nice stills, so it does actually make enough of a display piece if you want to put it on display. I just kind of wish that the front didn't have the sort of colorized image effect. It looks more like they scanned a lobby card where they would apply color to black and white images. But still, it's nice enough. But unfortunately, Paramount never revisited the film in terms of doing a new transfer. I mean, really, until they did the DVD, the first one, which is one of the worst DVDs ever made, because that was an early Lowry Digital Master, and that whole thing was just a nightmare. It was just a mess of DNR and other problems. But essentially between that and this Laserdisc release in the early to mid 80s, all there was a series of VHS reissues. I should point out that was just in the US. There was a very rare later Japanese Laserdisc pressing that does have digital audio. I've just never gotten to look at that, and I've never heard what sort of source it might have. My guess would be that it's just the old master, but with digital audio instead. Next is a disc from the RKO collection. This is 1956's I Married a Woman. I do try to get RKO discs whenever I can find them, because it's a nice series to collect, and a number of the films are quite obscure, with some of them only having releases in this line on physical media. So the RKO collection went far beyond the big heavy hitters. They all have the same cover design, so you get a nice black and white still and this uniform banner on the side. These are of course done by Image, so otherwise the layout is the same sort of standard style, and these do have PCM audio. Here it would be a mono mix, and since this is a 1956 film and there's no indication on the jacket, I think this is a 133 framed transfer, so I don't know if it's pan and scan scope or just opened up from a 185 feature, as by 1956 films were pretty much entirely widescreen. Next, from 1977, is the original Vestron and Image release of Rolling Thunder, the film written by Paul Schrader, which is a really highly regarded cult film and a film that should be better known and discussed. I was just curious to check out the transfer and the audio in particular, because this has digital audio. Unfortunately, it's not a letterbox master, so it's obviously a 4:3 transfer, and obviously not the way you want to see the film, but it's definitely a disc that doesn't really pop up all that often, and it's still in pretty good shape in terms of the jacket. So I just figured I would pick this up just to check the audio, because I figured I wouldn't stumble across this for less than $1 in good shape ever again. As usual, you've got the typical Image style with the sort of generic disc background on black, and then the art that was clearly designed for a VHS cover. Same thing for the rear, very simple layout, obviously designed for VHS, but just plopped onto an LD jacket. And then lastly, for local finds, this popped up, and it's a later Universal disc. Anytime it's a film from 97 and beyond, or a pressing from 97 and beyond, that's basically what I consider in late release Laserdisc territory, and these typically will have well above average picture quality, and some can be demo titles. So it's usually a nice idea to pick up late releases when you can, even if it's a film you're not really that interested in, because they typically will be, very high end for quality in terms of the Laserdisc format, and by that point the pressings were usually down to an exact science, so you're typically going to have a really substantially good presentation for the format, and a lot of them would rival their DVD counterparts. So anytime I see one of these, I just grab it if it's cheap enough. So this is the 1997 film That Old Feeling, which is directed by Carl Reiner, and I'm trying to see all of Carl Reiner's various films outside of his most famous films with Steve Martin. So I figured this was a no-brainer. This is a later Universal release, as you can tell from their modernized widescreen banner. Anytime you see one of those on an LD jacket, you know it's a later Universal release, like the rare AC3 reissue of Jurassic Park. The jacket's still in really perfect shape. This looks like it was hardly ever watched. And then the rear has the usual sort of write-up and credits and chapter stops, so it looks pretty solid. This is a widescreen master with the Dolby Stereo mix on the digital track, so it's matrix encoded, but unfortunately Universal and most studios at this time wouldn't always pay for the Dolby Digital licensing, so this is unfortunately one of those discs where they cheaped out and they skipped a 5.1 mix for a 90s film that had it. They would do this a lot, especially with comedies like this, because comedies typically don't have a very active surround track, so you can get away with just using the matrix stereo and you get the idea of it, but still it would have been nice if this had the AC3, but it's just one of those where the studio decided to skip that. Now to move on to the mystery box that Jason sent me. As usual, I never know what will be in one of these, and it is an absolute variety of gems. So to start, just going through directors and series, he sent me a disc I've always wanted to look at, but I've just never stumbled across one that was at a decent price, because this is was a late release, and the DVD was out at the same time and far more plentiful. And that is the late release special edition of Ford's The Searchers, with the absolutely beautiful looking new to 1998 cover art mock-up that became the standard art for the film on video for years. So this is the same master that came out on VHS and DVD in 1998, but the LD was only printed in limited quantities. It's of course not a gatefold, so these typically will be pretty dinged up by now because you've got multiple discs in here, and all Warner late releases are on very thin cardstock. But this is held up quite nicely, and it has the gloss finish still on there. As you can see, it's a little bit reflective. It has the special edition moniker because it has a variety of supplements that are part of the DVD Legacy supplements. So this is one of the few Warner LDs that actually got all the extras on it. Most would just be the transfer only. The rear is also much fancier than your typical Warner LDs would be, and this is what you came to expect from the late release Warner titles. So it's kind of a shame they didn't keep going a little bit longer in terms of their last batch of LDs. You can always tell Warner late releases from the other Warner titles, not just because the studio logo is updated, but it carries the Image Entertainment logo, because pretty much all the studios switched to having their last batches of LDs in the last years of the format being handled and distributed by Image. So here you have the film in its 1998 restoration master, like what you can see on the DVD, but this has lossless PCM mono in terms of the 1998 restored audio attempt, versus the DVD only having lossy double digital mono. This also has the extras in terms of the introduction. It has the making of documentary, it has the vintage deleted bits and home movies. So basically the earliest standard definition extras that exist for The Searchers on all of the physical media releases Warner has done since were originally put out in 1998, and you actually managed to get all of them here on this release. They are just before and after the film. Then you get a nice chapter stop breakdown on the side. So this is easily the most technically proficient and impressive release of the film on LD, as otherwise all you've got is the original 4x3 transfer from the 80s, and then the 1991 restoration attempt, which was just movie only. Next is another giant surprise. This is a disc I've always wanted to look at, and frankly didn't think I would get the chance to unless one just happened to pop up on eBay for cheap enough. And that is the Japanese release of Hammer's masterpiece Frankenstein Must Be Destroyed from 1969, the penultimate of the Peter Cushing starring Frankenstein films and one of Terence Fisher's best films. This is easily the darkest film Hammer ever made in one of their main horror series. It is an absolutely brilliant film if you've never seen it. It's a great suspense film. It's a great drama. It's a great horror film. It really does defy genre classification. And Cushing's performance as the Baron, once again, is a completely unique, riveting, multifaceted performance that is also absolutely singular when compared to his other portrayals of the Baron. Each film is basically following the Baron and taking a different tone and approach. But this one is definitely the darkest, and it is a masterpiece if you've never seen it. And the reason why I've wanted to see the Japanese LD is I've wanted to check its transfer in audio, because the Blu-ray has a more sort of brownish appearance in its color timing, and also the audio is, you know, it's clear enough, but it's also a little bit thin, and it sounds like it may have had some degrees of noise reduction, and there's still some wear in there. And with Hammer films, you do have to do a lot of digging around to try and figure out which versions may be more accurate, and their preservation history has been all over the place because they're all split up between different studios. And a lot of the films didn't have a lot of American releases, so sometimes the Japanese versions can be really important. So I just wanted to check this out at some point, and this uses a beautiful still from the actual film from the Major Brain Operation, a really stark background and nice usage of color. It, of course, doesn't have the Opie strip, but you can just imagine there would originally have been the Opie strip on the side here. And then the rear carries on the aesthetic with more stills from the film and even some promotional images, and it just looks really striking. This also has digital PCM audio with the original mono mix, so I can't wait to compare that with the DVD and Blu-ray. The only problem is that unfortunately this is a 4:3 transfer, so it's not the original aspect ratio. Of course, the only other difference is that this will have hard-coded Japanese subtitles, as it's a Japanese disc. Eventually the US did get a remastered letterbox presentation on LD pretty late in the format, and it's a very uncommon disc. And I'm sure it's probably the basis of what turned up on Warner's DVD, but I'd still like to get that and the late Warner Laserdisc of Curse of Frankenstein as well. But this transfer is technically unique for LD at this point, and I'm guessing is probably the Japanese LD equivalent of what was on the US VHS release. This was another complete surprise and a really lovely example of the nice jackets that CIC Video could do for films and television shows, but he sent me the CIC release of Knight Rider, which I think this is the pilot episode, if I'm not wrong. Of course, it's a little hard to tell because all the information on the jacket is in Japanese, but this has really striking original painted artwork, beautifully printed on the jacket. Of course, this being the Japanese variant of the artwork, but this is also on a really thick cardstock. So this is what you get on these releases from CIC Video at this time in the 80s and 90s when they've been preserved well. The artwork is also given a sort of, almost a sort of matte finish. I should say it's like a mix between a gloss and a matte finish. And it just feels really premium. And the overall quality on these is just absolutely incredible. So they make absolutely stunning display pieces. The rear is pretty straightforward with some images from the episode and some basic text, of course in Japanese, and then the transfer info on the bottom. So of course this is 4x3 with mono sound, and this is analog mono, so there's no digital track. But at this point, CIC releases were pretty much all analog audio. It was only in the early 90s when they started doing pressing runs or releases with digital audio tracks. But if you've ever seen a CIC jacket, this is pretty much what they look like in terms of the overall design, and almost always on a black background. But this is just a really nicely done release. It even has a nice little paper insert as well. So if you're a fan of Knight Rider and you want to get at least some of the show on LD, you might want to try and find one of these Japanese releases. This was a stunning surprise because this is a particular title that is a super late release and is extraordinarily uncommon. So both the US and Japanese versions go for quite substantial dollar amounts. Also, it's a late release AC3 disc of a series film, so that typically makes it even more valuable on the used market in terms of what it goes for even today. And of course, being in the US, the Japanese version is even more uncommon than the US version. So imagine my surprise to be going through this box and all of a sudden seeing this poking out. The Japanese AC3 release of Star Trek Insurrection, the third of the TNG films and the last to be released on LD. This is, of course, a 1998 film, a 1999 disc pressing, making it an ultra late release for the US and Japan. And, of course, it's also AC3. So you get the really striking original poster artwork, lovingly reprinted on the Laserdisc jacket. So, of course, it's really impressive looking. You've got the original Obi strip on the side, which has a sort of teal, bluish green color to it. And then the rear has our main cast of characters as the floating heads in space, with some basic text and information with also the chapter stops, and also letting you know this has both Dolby Surround encoded digital tracks and the all-important AC3 5.1 track. This is a transfer I've always been curious about. I'm sure the original DVD was basically porting this master, and the only difference with this being the Japanese disc is that it will obviously have hard-coded Japanese subtitles. It could also possibly have the difference in brightness levels because a lot of Japanese discs were mastered at a different IRE level, but all that requires is just adjusting the brightness on your display when you start. If you put in a Japanese LD and the image is way too dark, you know right off the bat it's one of those, and all you have to do is just turn up the brightness level. This is pretty much just movie only, but it's definitely a film that you don't expect to be able to look at the Laserdisc ever. This is one of those that people do chase after, and understandably so, because it's the last Star Trek film on LD, it's an AC3 disc, and it's a super late release, and so it's hard to get in either US or Japanese versions. So this was an absolute shock, just like everything else in here, but this in particular, because I just didn't think I'd ever get to look at one of these. Next was another absolute surprise, a disc and pressing I've always wanted to see, and again, unless I got lucky with Japanese discs, I never thought I'd get around to actually being able to look at this. And that is the 1995 letterbox reissue of Superman the movie. Now, this is essentially a 1995 Japanese repressing of the pre-existing letterbox US master. It's on the US release. And that US release on its Matrix stereo tracks had the all-important 70mm mix of the film, which is the best mix and has a lot more intricate sound design, particularly in the main title sequence. It is far beyond the notoriously wimpy original Dolby Stereo mix of the film that's on most other releases. The 70mm mix wouldn't turn up again until it appeared on the first UHD pressing of the film, and then eventually got added back for the latest pressings of the UHD. But still, this is a very uncommon disc, and what makes it important is that this is a repressing done several years later after the US release, which is quite a bit noisy in its transfer, and this is definitely a cleaner presentation of the same master. And they used the same iconic shot, which was used on some of the posters, as what was used on the US LD, but here they've made it look honestly much more like one of the original posters, and also use the image across more of the jacket compared to the US LD, putting everything in a black border. This also has a pretty nice gatefold for the time, just a bunch of black and white stills nicely laid out, oddly put on a sort of mint green background, but actually somehow it works. And so it's a quite nice looking gatefold, which is far more premium feeling than what we got in the US, which was no gatefold. And then you've got a collage of images on the rear, plus the ship escaping the destruction of Krypton, and some of the cast and crew information along with the technical info on the bottom, also indicating this has the Dolby Surround encoded digital tracks. So really, if you want the film on Laserdisc, this is really the best edition on a technical level, but of course you do have to deal with it having hard-coded Japanese subtitles, but with this being a scope film, those are mostly framed down in the bottom, so you can mask those off if you want to. The overall pressing quality is better than the US LD, so if you watch a lot of Laserdisc, you might notice that the picture seems a little bit cleaner, a little bit less noisy than the earlier 1990 US LD, but the overall difference isn't super extreme, so most average viewers may not notice much of a difference if you somehow had both of them. But if you're a giant fan of the film and you love how the film is on Laserdisc and you like having this version of the 70mm mix, you'll want to track down this Japanese version to have the technically better one. Just keep in mind it has the Japanese subtitles. For the Universal Signature Collection series, he sent me the release of Field of Dreams, which is a fully loaded special edition, very much one of the most stuffed of the Signature Collection line, and everything on here in the transfer basically formed the bulk of what was on the eventual DVD releases of the film. So this is really nicely done and far advanced over the original standard pressing that I have. This also has a really substantial gatefold detailing things further with a lot of nice imagery, so that's in keeping with the Signature line. And the rear goes over all the extras, the making of, the commentary, and has substantial liner notes. So just glancing at the rear and seeing all of this will very much tell you just how much is packed into here. So this is, of course, a brand new remastered transfer of the film and has the original Dolby Stereo mix on the digital tracks as well. So this is one of the really impressive and most stuffed releases you can get in the Signature line. The trouble is just finding a good copy at a decent price. And then he also included a couple of standard US discs. So this is an upgrade for me because it's a nice in-shrink copy of the Paramount Letterbox release of One-Eyed Jacks. The cover's a little standard, and they also unfortunately did a pan and scan version at this time with the same cover artwork. But for the longest time, this was the only way you could see one of the last VistaVision films, and a film directed by Marlon Brando, in a widescreen aspect ratio. It was otherwise in crummy-looking versions, not in widescreen, and so it was basically this or nothing until the Criterion Blu-ray happened from the new restoration. So this disc was really important for a long time, and it's got the original mono mix as digital PCM. It's otherwise, relatively standard, your usual sort of Paramount design for the early to mid-90s, but at least they got a remastered widescreen transfer of this out at some point. But that's why this LD was so important for so long. Next is a film I haven't actually seen in a long while, and that's the American remake of La Femme Nikita, Point of No Return, which has, very striking artwork, which is even more impressive when printed across a whole LD jacket. This is the Bridget Fonda starring remake directed by John Badham, and is in really nice shape considering this is a relatively common title that's usually super beat up in the bins. I can't remember for certain. I want to say that this title does have the potential of Laserdisc Rod. It's one of the handful of Warner titles where that can happen more often. But I've just not seen this film in years, so it'll be fun to spin up and actually rewatch it, but on Laserdisc now. It's a widescreen transfer with the original Dolby Stereo mix on the digital track, so should be a fun way to revisit this. This next one is another upgrade for me because this one is still in the shrink wrap. This is the standard Fox AC3 pressing of Broken Arrow, which is the other mid to late 90s John Woo action extravaganza starring John Travolta, but most people are just thinking about or always talking about Face Off. And honestly, there's a lot of stuff in Broken Arrow I actually kind of prefer because this one wears its B action movie status on its sleeve. This is a pretty solid Fox transfer for the time, of course, and there was also a DTS variant that is quite rare that I'd like to find someday, as the 5.1 mix on here, even in the AC3 version, is really nice and bombastic like you would expect a John Woo directed 1996 action film to be. So this is definitely a fun film to revisit or to see on Laserdisc if you've never seen it before. And the liner notes, because it's a Fox release, are quite nice. So you've got nice imagery on the background, and it very much conveys the sort of film you're getting into when you pick this up. And of course, this also has the Dolby Surround digital tracks as a backup if you don't have AC3 capability. And both the rear cover and the front sticker indicates the transfer has the THX seal of approval. And it's really difficult these days to find jackets with the shrink wrap in nice shape with a minty THX sticker still on them. So that in and of itself is just a nice thing to have. This last one is another that's technically just a condition upgrade, but this one is more just because I think the jacket printing is so good that I've always wished I could get a jacket that was in perfect shape. My own copy I've had for years just has a bit of general wear from being a Laserdisc from 1996, but this is a lovely condition copy of one of my favorite films, the 1996 film adaptation of the legendary Phantom. This, of course, has the main one-sheet artwork with the iconic Slam Evil tagline that we all love to smile over how wonderfully goofy it is. It's got the very deep purple color across the whole jacket. It's a wonderful display piece, and it really jumps out at you. So this is just a beautifully designed, very simple, but extremely striking LD jacket. Of course, literally extremely striking because you're getting the skull ring in your face. But this is just a jacket I've always wanted to get in perfect shape. Of course, even the spine is purple. And then the rear cover uses the main artwork that was used on the other major US release poster, plus some images and the chapter stops. All of this would be shrunk down for the DVD, which used the same exact transfer, and the Laserdisc itself is obviously more impressive in the art layout, and the transfer is so good on the LD that I do think it actually rivals or is possibly better than the DVD that ports the same master. The only major difference is that the audio codecs are a little bit different. So this has the theatrical audio mix, the 5.1 mix, and Dolby Digital AC3. This is one of the great sound mixes of the 90s and has some of the most aggressive Foley work in any film outside the Indiana Jones trilogy, and it's fitting because the writer of this film was the main writer on Last Crusade, and it's like the sound designers were trying to carry the Indiana Jones spirit. So this has a great bombastic sound mix. It's one of the films you simply have to watch in a home theater, but it's also got the Dolby Stereo Matrix track backup on the digital tracks, which you can listen to, which is nearly as good. Both of these tracks made it onto the DVD, but of course the Stereo Matrix track was lossy Dolby Digital, and the 5.1 was upped to the slightly higher bit rate of 448 kilobits per second versus the 384 on the Laserdisc, but they both sound pretty much exactly the same, and they are the theatrical audio mix. When Lionsgate released the film on Blu-ray and that went quickly out of print, that was a new transfer, but unfortunately they did an ill-advised 7.1 remix that frankly ruined all of the intricate Foley work, and all of the punchiness of the original track was gone. Subsequent Paramount reissues have seemingly reverted back to a version of the original mix, but no version past the Laserdisc and DVD have sounded the way that they should. And the film is supposed to get a UHD from Kino Lorber and a new Paramount master sometime this year, but I don't have much hope that's going to turn out well given both of those companies' track records. So this is still a great LD to have, or a great DVD to have, and it's one of the great sound mixes of the 90s. Now, to close out, he sent me 3 box set titles. This first one is one of the really cool Japanese exclusive releases of a television series. It's only part of a TV series, but it's got the same very intricate packaging that shows a great wealth of knowledge about the show itself and a great love for the material. So this is the box set of the Chicago Hope series, which has this really handsome and striking, heavy, thick gloss hard case box set with imagery from the show and this really striking spine that sticks out. It's even on the top of the box, so if you just have this sitting on the shelf, you know exactly what you're reaching for. The rear has not just imagery, but actual information about each of the episodes. This is a 4-disc set with 7 episodes spread across the 4 discs, and I think some supplements as well, in addition to wonderful further information and images on all the jackets and some printed materials as well. So you've got this really substantial booklet with information about the episodes and a full episode guide with biographical information about the cast and crew, and it's done in this sort of off-green ink that almost makes it look like some sort of medical printout, so it even fits the theme of this being a hospital show. The discs themselves are straightforward. The first 3 have 2 episodes each, and nicely, each of the jackets has direct images from each episode to represent them. So this looks like what you would see on, releases of Star Trek episodes and so on and so forth on LD, and it's just a really nice thing to have if you're a fan of a particular show. Each of the discs does have the original stereo mix for each show as digital PCM, which is another bonus here, as obviously there wouldn't be the space for that when the show would get a complete release on DVD and beyond. The only difference here is, of course, these will have hard-coded Japanese subtitles, so this being a 4:3 show from the 90s, you are going to have Japanese subs in picture, but that's basically the trade-off you have with getting these sets, is you're going to run into that, and you very quickly get used to those being in the bottom. Now, I remember this show being on when I was growing up, but it was a show I never really watched, so it'll be fun to actually look at this release from 20th Century Fox, who are the ones who actually did the LD box itself. So you've got the Fox logo in the corner of this set. I also find it fascinating to look at any sort of Japanese exclusive release, whether it's something I'm into or don't really know all that much about, because these are also interesting artifacts of their times, and sometimes they can have important transfer aspects. Next is one of the most legendary LD box sets, and that is the big Pioneer Special Edition of the uncut version of Natural Born Killers, or the director's cut that Oliver Stone made. This has all of the material that had to be trimmed to get the film a releasable rating back on the original release, and of course is a souped up presentation and transfer compared to the standard release version on LD that I've talked about before. So this has a just really striking cover that's also fully embossed, and this is a big, thick, hard case set with lift top box and the works. So this is definitely one of those super impressive boxes that no one is going to go to this level of quality again in terms of packaging design. The rear has more striking imagery and goes over the basic facts of this being the extended director's version or the unrated version of the film with all the extra footage. This has a new remastered transfer. It's got the Dolby AC3 5.1 mix of the director's version plus a Dolby Surround backup. It's got an Oliver Stone commentary and a variety of extras. You take the lid off and it's actually got printed material. This is the actual writing from Stone himself. So you got a very fitting picture of Oliver Stone on top of a crane, and it's got his printed signature. There is a high gloss, beautifully produced insert with gorgeous photos and really nice liner notes. It's a big fold out piece, so this is definitely full premium quality for the LD format. And of course, the back is where you get your chapter stops for the whole set. Now, the rest of the box is pretty much just the 3 individual jackets for each of the discs. So technically, they could have gotten away with doing this as not a big box set, but they went the extra mile of making all of the artwork and packaging really unique and worthwhile. So this is one of those where you can understand why they went ahead and made it a box. The most striking thing is, of course, the jackets were all unique, and each one spells out the title. And then the reverse of each one has wonderful imagery, but it's also distorted, so it looks fantastic, and the overall printing quality is incredible. Amazingly, these are all still in the shrink wrap, so the jackets have been beautifully preserved. So that's the Pioneer Special Edition box of the Director's Cut of Natural Born Killers. While the packaging may not be quite as fancy as the Pioneer Special Edition box of Stone's The Doors film, this is still really impressive, and it's one of those LD boxes that a lot of people try and get. It's not super common, but also when it turns up, because it's a thick box, they're usually super beat up in terms of the ones I've seen. That's why I've never gotten one, because every time I find one, it's beat to crap. So this just has a little bit of age wear, but otherwise it's still a stunning example of what you can do with physical media packaging and how that can influence your choice to actually rewatch a film. And then last but certainly not least is another surprise, a rather rare title I've always wanted to look at, and that is the absolutely stuffed complete Tex Avery collection on Laserdisc from MGM UA. This done in the same style as their Tom and Jerry and Golden Age of Looney Tunes sets, and the main draw like those sets is to see the as-is transfers done at the time of all the Tex Avery cartoons. Some are of course letterboxed, but these would be done from whatever print sources they had, and typically would predate the mid-90s restoration attempts and redubbing of audio and different things. So these can always be a nice sort of marker of where these classic cartoons are at in terms of their surviving print sources and what all the old video masters look like, but you get all of them in one place here with digital mono audio as well. Like the others, it's a lift top box, but it's got 5 discs in here with 9 sides of cartoons, so that means it is quite stuffed. So as you can see, I'm having to hold the front on as I'm holding this because this is just bulging with discs inside. There's a little bit of wear, but that's what you have to expect with these boxes at this point, because they're so filled with discs that typically the corners are kind of worn, and the lid is literally wanting to spring off as you're holding it because it's so stuffed. So nicely, you've got the list of all the cartoons and what sides they're on the back, but you've also got the fantastic insert inside with more information and a full write-up on each of the cartoons and each side, so you go through the journey of Tex Avery's animation career, and then further information on the back. And these collections really are the first iteration of what became standard on the modern animation collections starting in the DVD era. So of course, this is a really nice piece to have if you're a fan of collecting animation on Laserdisc, and one of the hardest to get and most desired of the animation titles. So this was a really wonderful thing to see, and now I can compare the transfers on here with what's on the volumes of Warner Archive Blu-rays of the Tex Avery cartoons. So that's it for this particular Laserdisc collection update in terms of what I picked up in local stores and another wonderful box from Jason. So thanks to Jason Koestner for sending me another wonderful mystery box and giving me some fun titles to go over and spin through and look at transfers and things. But as always, I hope my babblings about the Laserdisc format and collecting discs even in the modern age has been at least somewhat fun and informative. As always, please do keep supporting your local stores, as not only do you never know what's going to pop up in your area, but everything you purchase at local comic stores, record stores, or wherever you find physical media helps to keep them in business, and also it's fun to go on the hunt for new LDs wherever you might find them. So as always, please do keep enjoying the fun and magic of the Laserdisc format, keep your disc spinning, keep your players going, and thank you ever so much for watching.